September 10th, 1775, near Fort St. John's, Quebec Province. The colonial troops leave their boat and advance on the fort in darkness. This is a great adventure. A month ago, they were simply farmers, merchants, and trappers. But now, they are the Continental Army, and invading another colony to liberate it. And in their zeal, they know they'll win. But currently, they are creeping their way through swampy terrain in pitch blackness, listening for any hint of the enemy. They're on their guard. For days before, a party trying to approach the fort had been ambushed by 100 native warriors. Then suddenly, in the close, cloying darkness, one soldier hears a footfall, followed by whispers. He fires into the black night. His comrades join. Suddenly, gunfire stabs back at them, the returning blast silhouetting the hostiles shooting back. There's too many of them! The Continental soldiers flee back to their boats, running to General Montgomery to tell them of the ambush, and meeting their sister unit telling the same story. Uh-oh. Montgomery looks disappointedly from one unit to the other, for it would seem his proud new army has opened its invasion of Canada by shooting at itself. Thanks so much to NordVPN for helping us avoid the self-inflicted wound of unprotected internet. Last episode, we looked at the American invasion of Canada from the colonial perspective, but the British also knew an invasion was on the way, partially because it had already happened 4 times actually. Pretty much whenever there was a conflict in the Americas, British colonists had tried to strike north and capture French Quebec. And Major General Guy Carleton, governor of the province of Quebec, knew history was repeating. A year before the revolution broke out, the First Continental Congress had sent a letter inviting Quebec to join as the 14th colony. Though no one had ever responded, Carleton did worry about the loyalty of the population, who were still largely French and Catholic. In fact, Parliament was so concerned with the loyalty of the Canadians that in 1774, it had passed the Quebec Act, allowing Catholics to practice openly, vote, and hold government positions. Because if the French Canadians greeted the invading rebels as liberators, as the revolutionaries clearly expected, things would go bad fast. But now, there was hope for Carleton. For the Quebec Act had gotten the province's Catholic clergy on his side, plus most of the Quebec colonists just hated the English settlers to their south. So when he called for militia volunteers, it was a real moment of truth. Though that truth was few men came, which left him with only around 900 regular soldiers and a couple hundred militia, thinly spread across the huge territory. Desperate, Carleton appealed to the indigenous tribes, to whom much of the province was given over to ally with him, but the majority of them stayed neutral as well, waiting to see who'd win. Worse, he would have to wait months for reinforcements to replace any casualties. Given those realities, he employed a defensive strategy. He believed any colonial army would come up through Lake Champlain, aiming to take St. John's, Montreal, and then continue up the river systems to Quebec. So, he would fortify St. John's and stop the rebels there. He was proven right when the colonial army showed up outside the defenses on September 16th. Missing one general, though. General Philip Schuyler, the original Continental commander, had fallen so ill that he'd given up leadership to his second, Brigadier General Richard Montgomery, which overall was a good thing for the Continentals, him being far more experienced and capable, but a rather strange move for Montgomery himself. You see, he was a bit of a reluctant rebel. A long-time British Army officer, he'd only settled in the colonies 2 years before, and while he felt the British government had acted poorly, he was still in favor of reconciliation. Indeed, he may have only joined because his new wife's family were rabid patriots themselves. Now here he was, about to besiege a British fort in order to invade and capture another colony. To add to that awkwardness, during his army days, Montgomery had also served under Fort St. John's commanding officer. Still, Montgomery pushed through. He began erecting breastworks, employing small cannons in firing at the walls, though his troops were vastly outgunned, forcing him to move his cannons back while he waited for heavier artillery. At one point, while supervising construction of siege works, a cannonball passed through his coat and blew him off the top of the breastwork, but he got up and continued with his task. Thankfully, Montgomery had one advantage here, because before getting sick, Schuyler had successfully lobbied the Iroquois Confederacy to stay neutral in the war. At the same time, the British had bungled their own relations with the native tribes, for during the campaign's opening ambush, British troops had refused artillery support, causing their indigenous allies to desert. But they weren't the only ones leaving, for even as Montgomery received his heavy guns, the one-year enlistments of his soldiers were starting to come due. Meaning every day more left to go home and tend their fields, which, let's face it, was better than sitting in a rainy trench getting bombarded from a fort. As weeks passed, and his army shrank, Montgomery stared at the bluffs behind St. John's, thinking that if he could just get some cannon up there, he could end this siege. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold and his troops were entering the uncharted wilderness of Maine, planning to march to Quebec overland. Initially, things went swimmingly. Arnold had no problem recruiting 1,100 men. In fact, he had more than he could take. One volunteer, Aaron Burr, was only allowed to come if he agreed to do so with no official status or military rank. They reached the Kennebec River without issue, but from there, things got dicey. The man they'd contracted to build flat-bottom riverboats had made them 4 feet shorter than requested, 26 feet rather than 30. They had gaps between the planks, leaked horribly, and were made of heavier wood than contracted. Days after leaving the last major settlements, they had to take a week to repair the boats and try to dry out their food and gunpowder, which was already sodden. It was clear at this point that the expedition had been sabotaged. The barrels they used, made by a cooper who supposedly had loyalist sympathies, were not watertight, and it was increasingly clear that the copy of the British military map Arnold was using had been censored for civilian use, a practice at the time to avoid them being used by enemies. Landmarks had been altered, names and distances changed, so they kept having to double back, losing them valuable time. By the time they really knew where they were going, they were hungry, tired, getting sick, and going a little mad. You know, very Werner Herzog, Aguirre, Wrath of God kind of stuff. But that was preferable to when the rivers got too low for the boats to pass. Then they had to take the 400-pound crafts out of the river and carry them on their shoulders, often up the sides of rocky cliffs, just like in Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo. I'm sensing a theme. At this point, a third of the expedition turned back, believing Arnold would simply die in the wilderness, never reaching Quebec. But, like a disoriented penguin running towards the mountains, Arnold refused to turn around. He kept going, and men died of exhaustion and disease. Once they reached the heights of Maine and began traveling the rapids toward Quebec, their boats smashed on rocks and pulled soldiers under the whitewater. And even those that survived were beginning to starve. They ate rotten rations, and eventually the officer's dog they kept as a mascot. They even created a soup by boiling leather pouches and belts, and ate their shoes. Just like the short film Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. That is a deep cut, Rob. Nice job up top. But real talk, do you think we're overestimating the number of people interested in both the Revolutionary War and German auteur Werner Herzog? Ha, who am I kidding? Of course these jokes are landing. Rescue dog style, am I right? Hey-oh! Ha ha! We have fun here. When the survivors of the expedition reached the native settlements along the St. Lawrence River, staggering out of the woods, their clothes ragged like the German wild man Caspar Hauser. Sorry, done for real, promise. The witnesses who saw them couldn't believe what they'd accomplished. And honestly, neither could the men of Arnold's expedition. They'd made it. Within days, after eating and reprovisioning, they would be outside Quebec. One soldier wrote home saying that the men believed that Arnold's feat was equal to no other military maneuver since Hannibal had crossed the Alps. For through those days of hunger and danger, it was his indomitable will that had carried them through. But they were too late. Had they arrived 10 days earlier, Quebec would have been completely undefended. Remember, Governor Carleton had sent nearly everyone to St. John's and Montreal, just in time for Montgomery to finally seize the heights and force surrender. In fact, the governor had escaped Montreal in disguise just an hour before the Continental Army had taken it without a shot. But now, Carleton was dug in at Quebec, and it would require a huge expense in blood to take it, blood that would spatter on the snow. Because as Montgomery and Arnold joined forces, they'd decided to attack under the cover of a blizzard, and Aaron Burr would prove he wasn't a bad lieutenant. Which, according to my Google search, sadly isn't streaming anywhere outside the Philippines and Indonesia for some reason. You know, if only there was a way I could embark on some digital tourism to see this Nick Cage classic. Oh hey NordVPN, didn't see you there. Were you incognito? Now, of course, NordVPN is so much more than just watching movies outside your country's streaming catalog. Because with just one click, Nord shields you from malware, trackers, and ads, notifies you if someone scraped your info and put it on the dark web, gives you a dedicated IP to avoid captchas and block lists, and connects up to 10 of your devices to one of thousands of blazing fast dedicated servers around the world. So you and yours are always interneting just super fast. But what's speed without security and privacy? Well, NordVPN uses next-generation encryption, can enable private DNS servers for increased security, has an actual kill switch in case your surfing leads to a place where you need to shut down fast, and never tracks or shares what you do online. So for protection, privacy, and a great deal on NordVPN, all you gotta do is use our code nordvpn.com/extrahistoryvpn, or click the link below. Then you're gonna get a huge discount on a 2-year plan with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you'll receive 4 extra months of next-generation protection. But there's more, because for a limited time, when you use our code, you also get a data voucher for their super handy eSIM service, Saley. Seriously, being able to access local cell and data services quickly has saved my bacon and my wallet a few times while traveling abroad, so this is a very cool bonus. Just head here to protect yourself with all the perks of NordVPN, and then once you're sure you're secure, check out our next episode here.
Angelo Valenciana, Acolyte Games, Dominic Valenciana, Foxstock Hunters, and Izzy Coin, Joseph Blame, and Kuya Coy, a legendary Patreons!
Thanks all.